Welcome back to another episode of the Forever and Ever podcast. And today is our first episode of the year. We took a little break for the holidays and now we are going back at it. And we left off on talking about building emotional trust. And today we're going to go into another topic which kind of coincides with building that trust. And that is how to handle conflict in a healthy way. And let's just face it, every couple argues, even me and Lauren. But whether it's about big decisions or small everyday kind of annoyances, conflict is this normal part of any relationship. And here's the thing, how you handle that conflict can either bring you closer together or create distance. I honestly feel like that there's been certain moments where for me and Lauren, certain arguments after we were able to resolve, it's almost like we felt stronger together. And it's not about trying to avoid conflicts altogether, even though that does happen, the better that you get at building that trust and learning how to talk to each other better. But it's about learning how to really operate in the midst of a conflict. You know, years ago, I actually used to teach an anger management class for juveniles that were court ordered to go through the class. And one thing that I would say is that it's unrealistic to try to never get angry again, but that the class is all about learning how to manage your anger the next time something happens. And that's kind of what we're talking about today when it comes to handling conflict. So we're going to talk about how to handle disagreements in a way that strengthens your relationship instead of tearing it down. So if you've ever felt stuck in this cycle of fighting or even of trying to avoid those conflicts, maybe you're specifically not saying anything because you just don't want to have another fight. That's not going to necessarily solve this, bring the solution either. This episode is just for you, so let's just go ahead and dive in. So why does conflict happen? First, we have to understand that at its core, conflict usually comes down to unmet needs or miscommunication. And maybe you're feeling unappreciated, and instead of expressing that, it comes out in kind of like these subconscious vented frustrations over dirty dishes or laundry left out or etc. Or maybe you both have different ways of handling stress and it causes tension. You know, I find that sometimes we just kind of sweep things under the rug for a long time and then all of a sudden it just blows up in our face. And it's not even that the thing that set us off was the real big issue, but we have not addressed the small issues over years and years that have built up to this big thing that's inside of our hearts. And so there's also those moments where it is simply a bigger conflict, differences in values, maybe differences in parenting styles or financial priorities. You know, these are some big pillars in which people have it brings like the sense of security and foundation to our relationships. And when these feel rocky or insecure, it can very easily and quickly turn into disagreements that feel overwhelming. But there are also opportunities for us to learn more about each other and grow as a couple. For me and Lauren, I think in this season of our life, some of those big conflicts often come from our different ideas of parenting at different moments. You know, say a situation happens with our kids and maybe I respond with form A and Lauren thinks that it should have been responded with form B. And all of a sudden it creates this big disagreement to where it's not even really between us. It's about how we're trying to handle our kids and how we're trying to love our kids and raise our kids and teach our kids. And it can feel so personal, and just one comment can make one of the people feel like, well, you're supposed to back me up. We're supposed to be in agreement. You know, why did you say that in front of the kids? And all of a sudden, something that, again, didn't necessarily have anything to do with you guys is become this wedge between y'all because it's this conflict that y'all both have to deal with. Same goes for money, same goes for different values. And so here's the truth. Conflict is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be so destructive. And when we handle it well, it can actually bring us closer to one another by helping us understand each other on a deeper level. I've said this a lot of times before, but in the same scope of parenting, there's times where I've learned that simply when it comes to different parenting techniques and ideas, there's times where my way might work better with the kids, and there's other times where Lauren's way may work better with the kids. And the disagreements we've had over it has helped us to not only learn how to understand each other, but trust each other in the process, to where times where Lauren has bit her tongue and said, okay, I'm going to trust him, and my way worked. And same for me. There's times where I kind of held back, like, oh, you should say this, but her way worked better. And it's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about learning how to trust each other through the process. And you could, again, apply that to these big conflicts, smaller conflicts. So let's go into some common mistakes in handling conflict. Before we dive in, try to talk about handle the healthy resolutions, we should talk about some common mistakes we as couples do when it's during these disagreement times. The first mistake is avoiding the issue altogether. Sweeping things under the rug might feel easier in the moment. That's what a lot of us do. But those unresolved issues don't just go away. They resurface, and it's often way bigger, way messier than it needs to be. And so often we think, well, this is how I'm loving my spouse, or I'm just going to take one for the team. I'm going to bite my tongue. I'll just be the one to hold it in, and I'll let them say this or do that. And it's just easier to avoid us fighting about it. You might be able to do that for a couple months, maybe a couple years. But eventually, you're not going to be able to handle it anymore, because you have to be able to express yourself. Every human being has to be able to express their emotional needs and ideas, and you're just not going to be able to do that forever. And that's why so often people who try to avoid issues altogether, it seems like it works at first, but eventually it blows up, and it's those couples that seem like, well, it seemed like everything was just fine, but one person in that relationship often feels like it wasn't fine for so long, and they never voiced it. Another person feels almost like caught off guard, like it wasn't fair, that you should have told me, we could have talked about it. So again, avoiding the issue is not the solution. It will resurface eventually. And it will be bigger, and it will be messier. Number 2 is escalating the argument. When emotions are running high, it's easy to let things kind of spiral out of control. Anger is kind of like that drug. You get a little bit, it's like, oh yeah, I like how this feels. And it can really escalate. It's like sometimes you'll be in a fight and you won't even remember why you're angry. But it feels, for some reason, like this anger has like this addictive quality, to where you're kind of just feeding that anger in the moment, even though it's not reasonable. And yelling and name calling or bringing up past mistakes can turn in a small disagreement into this major situation, because you're letting that anger or that emotion escalate the argument into something different entirely. We have to really keep a gauge at where we're at and understand, is this what I'm feeling right now? Is this reasonable for this conflict? Is this reasonable for this situation? Or is it escalating when it doesn't need to be? And there's been often times for me and Lauren, it was just like it kind of gets up out of control, and then one of us will say, like, I don't even know why this is that big of a deal. And the other, if we're so angry, the other person will be like, well, I don't know either. And so we both agree that it shouldn't be a big deal, but we both escalated the argument to bigger than it needs to be. So again, recognizing that and bringing it back down. Number 3 is shutting down, just stonewalling. When one partner withdraws and refuses to engage, it can be just as damaging as yelling, and it leaves the other person feeling unimportant or ignored, or even like this sense of abandonment. And it's neither one work. Escalating the argument or shutting down, it is damaging to our emotional trust of one another. And maybe you have like good intentions for shutting down because you don't want to say anything that you'd regret, but you can't also just abandon that person to not know what you're thinking. If you really need a minute to calm down, voice that. Say, look, I'm not trying to just shut down. I'm not trying to just ignore you, but I need a minute because I feel too emotional to talk about it. Just let's take some time. And it has to be like a reasonable amount of time. You can't go like just abandon the situation and go the whole day or days without bringing it up again. You have to give closure to that person to be able to talk about it again. And number 4, playing the blame game. This is always fun, focusing on who's right and who's wrong instead of working together to solve the problem can create this resentment and division. And this is something that I think is unilateral, regardless of gender or background. It's like we constantly have this idea of blaming the other person. I always like the idea of even going back to like biblical stories like Adam and Eve. When God brings up who ate from the fruit, Eve blamed the devil and Adam blamed Eve. And so we have this nature of trying to blame other people for the problems, but to just simply recognize, is there a point to blaming someone right now if we're both trying to reach a solution? And if it's something, maybe there's a point or cause for someone to take responsibility for something, like they made a big mistake. But I think a lot of times we're blaming one another for a disagreement to where there's not a right and wrong. We have different perspectives in the situation, or we have a miscommunication that happened. And so often it'll be a situation will be like, well, I didn't mean it like that. Yeah, but you said this. And it's like, okay, but that wasn't meant. And so we have to, it doesn't really resolve anything by trying to prove who is right or prove who's wrong. It's about coming to this reasonable solution and building back up that resolution, that solution to the problem. So the good news is that these patterns can be broken with a little practice and a lot of intention. For me and Lauren, we're going on 13 years, and it's taken, I feel like, it took me almost like 3 or 4 years just to learn how to voice my emotions in a healthy way. Before, it's just very confusing, and it was like, man, it was easier just shutting down. It takes practice, and just as you're going about trying to avoid these pitfalls when it comes to conflict, just don't give up after 1 or 2 tries. It took years of building up these, say, unhealthy qualities. Now it might take some time to rebuild some healthy ways to handle conflict. So let's go into those healthy ways. Let's get into the practical stuff and steps on how we can handle these conflicts in healthy ways. Number 1 is you might need to take a pause. Like I said earlier, when emotions are running high, it's okay to take a step back and give yourself a short break for you both to have time to cool down and collect your thoughts, and just make sure that you guys agree on this time to come back and continue the conversation. Like maybe you just need to say, look, can we just wait till we put the kids down and talk about this together? Like, let's just go through this day and understand that we are going to talk about it after the kids go down. We don't need to be fighting in the midst of the chaos. Let's just take a pause. Maybe it's late at night and you feel really emotional and say, look, can we just talk about it in like 30 minutes? And try to give an actual time frame rather than just saying like, I don't want to talk about it right now. Let's make a point where we are going to engage in this conversation. Let's not abandon it. Number 2, use I statements. Instead of just pointing the finger saying, well, you said this and you did that. And remember years ago when you said this and did that. Focus on on how you feel instead of trying to control what the other person feels or what the other person has said. For example, instead of saying, you never listen to me, try something like, I don't feel heard when we're talking with one another. I don't feel like you're hearing me or understanding what I'm trying to say. This approach can help really lower that defense response that we often have, and it helps keep that conversation more productive. And again, that example is pretty common. You never listen to me. Instead of saying that, I just don't feel heard since last time we spoke. I don't feel heard when we're talking even right now. Number 3, actively listening. Listening is just as important as speaking. And when your partner is sharing their feelings, don't interrupt them or start planning your response. So often we pick up like the very first 3 words that they say, the first sentence maybe, and we already make a judgment of what our response is going to be. And maybe we don't even interrupt, but we're just waiting for them to finish. And we already, regardless of whatever else they say in this dialogue, we already know what we're going to say, and we're going to just get them with this. And we're not really listening to them. We're not really trying to understand them. We're not really hearing them. And instead, focus on really trying to feel empathy and really try to be in their shoes for a moment, because they have feelings just like you. And reflect back on what you've heard them say to make sure that you understand. Maybe you should say, okay, so what I'm hearing is that you feel this way. You feel that way. and you're able to reflect before you respond. So, well, I felt like this. It just take a moment to allow yourself to hear them first. And just to, I glazed over it, but I think it's really important to work on not interrupting one another. It is pretty much like a real quick tell that you're not listening because you're already you don't even want them to finish. You're just going to interrupt and tell them how they're wrong and you're right. Actively listen. And number 4, stay solution focused. Remember, the goal of the conflict resolution isn't to win the argument. It's not to prove that you're right. It's to find a solution that works for both of you. Approach the conversation as teammates, working together for this common goal and not as opponents trying to score points. Again, it's sometimes me and Lauren, we have to even in middle of our conversation or argument, we have to remind ourselves look, we're on the same team. I want this to work. I love you. When you said this, I felt this way. I know that you may not have meant it like that, but this is how I felt. And it kind of helps reset us by just interjecting look, I want this to work. We're on the same team. We're not fighting against each other. I don't want to fight with you. And it helps it to stay solution focused, and vocalizing these things can really help. Number 5, apologize and forgive. If you've hurt your partner, own it and apologize sincerely. And if your partner apologizes, choose to forgive them. Holding on to that resentment will only keep you stuck in that conflict. And I want to just take a moment to emphasize this idea of sincerely apologize. Tell me if this feels sincere. Okay, I'm sorry. How many times have we apologized like that? Take a moment to say, I'm sorry. I don't want you to feel that way. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. I shouldn't have said that. Make that apology feel a little more calm, a little more secure, sincere. And when it comes to forgiveness, take a moment to even resolve that forgiveness in your heart, in your mind, when your partner does apologize. Or even if they don't apologize, maybe there's something that you need to forgive and have it in your heart. But when it comes to both of y'all having this mutual reconciliation of allowing yourselves to forgive one another, especially if there's a sincere apology behind it. Now, let's go into building a culture of respect and understanding. So, handling conflict in a healthy way is more than just trying to resolve this single argument or disagreement. It's about building this culture of respect, building this culture of understanding one another. That means being mindful of how you speak to each other. It means even in the heat of the moment to avoid insults, to avoid sarcasm, to avoid these dismissive comments, and instead approach every disagreement with the intention of kindness, of even curiosity for what they have to say. And it also means recognizing that you're both on the same team consistently. Your partner isn't your enemy. The problem itself is what is in between you. It's not your partner. It's this misunderstanding. It's this miscommunication. When you work together to solve the problem rather than fight your partner, you're able to strengthen your bond and build trust together. So that leads us into our last part, which is when to seek outside help. Sometimes despite your best efforts, conflict feels too big to handle on your own. You feel like you're not getting anywhere. You both just keep going in circles. You both feel like you can't trust one another. You feel like you're having to revisit the same thing over and over. And that's okay. I mean, sometimes it can be really hard if you're not, when you feel like you're not able to reach one another. And seeking help from a counselor, therapist doesn't mean that your relationship is failing. It means that you're committed to making it stronger. It means that you're not wanting to just abandon one another and say, well, everything we tried, nothing works. A professional might be able to help you uncover underlying issues. A professional might be able to help improve your communication or teach you tools for resolving conflict more effectively. It's a sign of strength, not weakness, to reach out for support when you need it. And that's one of the reasons why I created the Forever Never workshop for married couples. It is specifically there to be able to help give that support when you feel like you need it, especially in those moments where you feel like you've tried everything. Even some of the attendees from our sessions have literally said, we've even tried going to therapists over and over. It never worked. But once we went to this workshop, it feels like we finally started getting to the heart of some of our issues. And so that's what I love to hear. If that sounds like something for you, then just message me or check out our website to learn about when our next sessions are going to be starting. So all that being said, here's a challenge for you this week. The next time a conflict arises, try using one of the strategies that we talked about today, whether it's taking a pause, using I statements, or focusing on solutions. Start practicing healthier ways to handle these kinds of disagreements. And don't forget to join our free Facebook group, where you can connect with others who are going through the same things that you're going through, trying to build on their relationship as well. You'll be able to find connections with other people, tips, encouragement, and exclusive offers for our workshops and ways to be able to even get a copy of the book Forever and Ever. So if you haven't got that book already, you can get it on my website or on Amazon. All that being said, I hope that this episode was meaningful for you and that helped make a difference in building your marriage. Until next time, have a great life.